Very much. This is May 24, the year 2010, ACAP meeting. We've got about a dozen people here, and we're going to be addressed by Cay Hehner. He's the director of the Henry George School here in New York City, and he's a scholar of the First Order, Ph.D.
You're always exaggerating, Harold.
No, it's not exaggerating at all. He gave a presentation the other day.
Third.
He gave a presentation the other day that was outstanding at a thing which we attended, and he's going to be talking to us about the film about George, Henry George, who's got very important ideas on the economy, macroeconomy, in terms of particularly a single tax thing and the way that taxing should be done. I'm going to get out of the way and let him talk. So without further ado, let's give a hand to Cay Hehner.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Harold. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure.
We don't need a flip chart, I guess.
No. Oh, let me get it.
Yeah, that's fine. Well,
That's very subtle.
Okay, Cay, take it away.
What's the problem we're having now?
No problem.
We're
It's recording. Go ahead.
we're having well, I mean, I'm glad you guys are technically on top of it. Economic. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Everything is fine. There's no unemployment. We all live happily ever after. But while we're down here, we don't live happily ever after. You just saw that film, End of Poverty. It's a take on Jeffrey Sachs's bestseller, and it's End of Poverty, Why Global Poverty, and with a question mark. And we were just discussing, they're trying to make us believe that poverty and economic disasters that we're going through right now are like tsunamis, like God-given force majeure. And that's, I think it's one of the biggest lies that has ever been imposed on man. Poverty is a man-made phenomenon, and because it's a man-made phenomenon, it can be abolished by man. Now, in order to look at what they are selling us as the truth, which is just smoke screen and mirrors, which is a snow job, an eyewash, it's probably good to look at some economic principles. What's the economy for? What's the economy for? Anybody? Yeah?
Economy is an abstract concept
Yes?
for redistribution of energy, supplies, food, substance.
Okay.
But it's all abstract, it's man-made, it could be used, some other methodology could be utilized, but it would amount to a similar situation.
Okay. That's a postgraduate answer. Thank you. That's very advanced.
Yes,
Please.
I think the present economy, the modern world economy is self-centered.
Yes.
Just the top 25% enjoy it.
You bet it is. You bet it is.
It's not defined that way.
Yes.
There's no more definition for economy in the present world.
Okay.
It's just self-centered.
Very good. So if we look at this self-centered economy, it's only serving the top 25%. We have lost our bearings. Originally, the economy wasn't an abstract. You had, I think I said it on your show, Harold. If you have 200,000 years of Homo sapiens sapiens, this is a little bit blinding. I need some sunglasses now. It's a little bit irritating.
That's not very good, the light should come from the other side.
And it'll show every hair that I haven't shaved this morning, probably.
What got is a short cord.
Short cord.
Just put it on the wall, actually.
Just put it up the upper
Put it on
right.
the wall,
Turn
and
that light on,
that
Josh.
reflection is enough.
Josh, turn that light on. Can you reach it back there? That light on.
Yes.
Go up.
Yeah, this is much
It's
better.
too strong anyway.
This can you stand?
This is fine.
Okay.
It's about ideas, not appearances, right?
Right.
So, 200,000 years we've had Homo sapiens sapiens, and 150,000, 200,000 years we've had some sort of societal organization among Homo sapiens. And none of these, our records are very short. I mean, India has, what, we're going back 40,000 years, the Vedas. This is much older than the West acknowledges. This stuff, the oral tradition on which the Vedas are based is so much older. We have an inferiority complex if we would acknowledge how old this really is. So, none of these, and if you go back ancient Egypt, the 18th dynasty, Tutankhamun is all over the city, Hatshepsut, Akhenaton, Nefertiti. That's like what, 3,000, 4,000 years back, and then we're in the dark. We don't have records, but it doesn't mean that people were uncivilized, that people didn't do things, that people hadn't a cultural agenda or cultural occupations, preoccupations. But all of these societies, going 200,000, 150,000 years back, they all had some sort of an economic setup. Redistribution of wealth, distribution of resources, yes. The economy originally is just there for the satisfaction of basic needs. And that's the Maslow's pyramid of needs. It's the basic needs first, and then it goes up. We can talk, we can sit and engage in discussions about the right economic action, because we're all well fed, we slept well, we're fairly warm, we have all our basic needs covered. And we're going to have 7 billion people on the planet this decade, estimated. We're going to have the 7th billionth baby coming before the decade is over. When Malthus was writing his theory of overpopulation in 1798, we hadn't reached the billion mark yet. I would think it was closer to 500 million than 2 billion. These are very rough estimates. Now we're a little more educated with these estimates. This is the planet. You have 500 million people on this planet, and now you have 7 billion people on this planet. Is the planet like a balloon mushrooming? Is it growing with every baby that's being born? No. So relatively speaking, to the increasing world population, the planet is shrinking. Proportionately speaking, resources, raw materials, and the planet is shrinking. Compared to now we have 7 billion people. If we had 500 million in Malthus's time, that means we are, every resource on the average is 14 times as expensive as it was, 14 times as dear as it was back then, 220, 30 years ago. So that creates a problem. That creates the problem that all wars we're fighting now, all wars we've been fighting in the past, and all wars certainly we're fighting in the future are going to be wars on resources, over resources. We are not going to Iran and Iraq to export democracy. I mean, this is really a joke. We're going there because there are resources. Tibet has been raped, and the Dalai Lama is in town right now, right? Tibet, 50 years, China just raped the rape of Nanking, the rape of Tibet. It's been over 50 years. Over 2 billion people, 3 billion people have been killed. Women are sterilized by force. They're trying to wipe out the Tibetan population in a genocidal operation that since the Holocaust and since some of the stuff that Stalin did in the Soviet Union has not had its match. Nobody's talking about bringing and on top of it they're floating the canard that the Dalai Lama is a feudal lord who blah blah, who isn't really in the modern world, so they're trying to camouflage what they're doing there. So nobody is saying we have to go to Tibet and liberate Tibet or bring democracy to the Chinese. Nobody's saying that because there are no resources, so nobody cares. Now if you watch The Lost Horizon, if you read that wonderful book by James Hilton, maybe there is a place in the world where all the cultural treasures are kept, all the spiritual treasures from ancient times, the Vedic secrets, the secrets of the Egyptians. We don't know how to build the pyramids. We don't know how the yogis did some of the stuff they're doing. We don't know we don't know what happened in Atlantis, all these ancient cultures. So, bless you. Our task is, no, well, let's step back one step. For 120 years or so, since the marginal utility school, since the Austrian school, since late 19th century, we have been told that the economy is individualized. It's only about individual decisions. You have 10 sandwiches, and the 11th sandwich has only a more marginal utility than the other 10. That's a philosophy of a dying, effete empire of the rich, people who never had to work in their lives. When Mises saw all these guys, they were just sitting in their ivory towers. They were looking at these princes. It's like, what is it, Sarah Ferguson? No, Ferguson, the Duchess of York. She was trying to peddle. She was trying to peddle access to the Duke to her former husband for what, 40,000? Was it $40,000?
$750,000.
Thank you. So this kind of nonsense. These people, they're the idle rich, the leisure class, the conspicuous consumption crowd. They don't know what they're doing, so they have to come up with something. So for Mises and these people, they were saying, okay, the economy is an individual decision. I can make one decision. I can eat the 11th sandwich or not. But if I don't have any sandwiches, it's like the same thing as saying, Marie Antoinette, why don't they eat cake? They don't have bread. Why don't they eat cake? So it's an upper class of philosophy that says all economic decisions are individualized. It's psychological. Now let's go back to the basics of economics. How long does it take you to survive if you don't have air?
5 minutes.
Thank you. I had a smart alecky kid in a high school who said, the world record in holding your breath is 9 minutes and 16 seconds. And I said, I don't want to hold my breath even 5 minutes, right? Okay, is that an individual decision whether we can breathe or not? That's the life instinct, right? We don't have that decision. We have to breathe. We need air. So if there were a monopolist, a speculator who had monopolized, who had cornered the market of oxygen in the world, he could ask any price he wanted. Every time you breathe, you pay a quarter. Now, the moment you run out of quarters, you have to go to the ATM machine. By the time you reach the ATM machine, you're blue in the face, right? So, that's air. That's not an individual decision. 7 billion people need air. How long can you survive without water or liquids? That's generous. I used to think 3 days. I like to have a glass of wine in the evening, and I get upset if I don't have it like 3 days in a row.
And you don't need the water.
Liquids. We're talking liquids. I'm kidding, right? But okay, let's say a week. You can survive for a week. There was another guy in the class said, I have survived on a Polynesian island for 9 days without anything. The downside of that statement was nobody was there to check on him. Anyway, so let's say a week you can't. After a week you're dead. You're dehydrated, right? So 7 billion people on the planet need clean water or liquids. Food. How long can you survive without food?
30 days.
30 days?
5 minutes.
3 days. Again, in India, you have these people who maybe they fast 9 months or 3 months, and they're the guys who sleep on the nail boards, which I find admirable. But what? Yogi, thank you.
One for 6 months.
Here you go. Here you go.
Without food.
Completely admirable feats of bravery there. It's the mind over matter. But can that be made a general model for the world population? Let the people starve for 9 months? I don't think so. So we have air, water, food. How long can you survive in a New York winter night, let's say in a January blizzard, without any kind of clothes and any kind of shelter? Yogi again could survive, but most people,
In the Himalayas?
they can. They sit in the mountains. They have this. They sweat while there's a glacier coming down. That's 0.001% of the very few. They're enlightened beings, like the Buddha and such people. So we have air, water, food, shelter, and clothing. That's a market. 7 billion people. That's a guaranteed effective demand. It's a guaranteed aggregate global demand of these things. That's not an individual decision. Our Austrian friends are wrong. What did Billy Wilder say? The Austrians persuaded the world that Beethoven was Austrian and Hitler was German. Yeah? So that's the same thing. So one of the explanations for this crisis that we are in right now is We have overproduction. How can you have overproduction if the last baby on the planet is still starving? 1 billion people, according to United Nations estimates, they're short on potable water. They're short on enough to eat. So how can you say we have overproduction? We have maybe a mismatch of production and consumption. We have a mismatch of supply and demand. So the real problem is not that there is not, Stiglitz in his last book, admirable book, Free Fall, the reasons for the present economic crisis, he says we have a lack of global aggregate demand. I beg to differ. Global aggregate demand, of course, that means everybody has to have purchasing power. Now, a lot of people don't have purchasing power, but the people have all these needs. So what we need to do is capitalize their worth, capitalize their labor power, capitalize their capital, and let them have purchasing power. But the aggregate demand is there. It's a lie to say we don't have sufficient aggregate demand.
They don't have money.
So, but is that their fault, or is that part of an unjust world financial system?
Yes.
Okay. So now, what's Henry George? Does distinguish Henry George from most of the other economists? Henry George says, well, let me first say what doesn't distinguish him. What kind of school does Henry George belong to?
Henry George School.
That's a good one. What kind of school of economic thought does he belong to? Who were his mentors? Henry George belongs to the, I'm asking a rhetorical question. You're asking me to give a talk on Henry George, so if you're giving me a talk on Jung and you're an expert on Jung, then you know more than, obviously. So Henry George is a classical economist, in the classic sense of the word. David Hume, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, John Stuart Mill, James Mill, Thomas Malthus, Nassau Senior, Karl Marx, all the Marxists.
Marshall?
No, Marshall is the going over the edge to the neoclassicals. Marshall is going over the edge. That we could come to the neoclassicals in a moment. So generally, as capstone of the classical economists is considered Karl Marx, John Stuart Mill, and Henry George. As capstones are considered, these three gentlemen. That means, by and large, they agree on the basic economic principles. And what are the basic economic principles of classical economics, which were destroyed by people like Marshall, by the Austrian school, in an operation, in a coup d'etat, which in the history of science has not seen its equal. Has not seen its equal. The science of classical economics by these men, Smith, Marx, Ricardo, Mill, and so on, there was a coherent set of principles for 150 years, from the Physiocrats on, from the 1750s to the end of the 19th century, almost 150 years. And what are the principles? The principles are, what is political economy or economics? Political economy is the science that deals with the production and distribution of wealth. Political economy is the science that deals with the production and distribution of wealth. Neoclassical economics not even gives us a definition of wealth. In other words, you have a physicist who can't tell you what the subject of his science is. What kind of a science is that? So, if political economy is, I get into the difference between economics and political economy in a moment, but let's for a moment just take political economy. Political economy is the science that deals with the production and distribution of wealth, basic needs, to cover basic human needs. Now, what is wealth? Wealth is material. Wealth has exchange value. It satisfies human desires, and it is based on human labor. These are 4 criteria. If you have these 4 criteria fulfilled, then you know you have wealth. Intellectual activity is not wealth until it congeals into some sort of material product. I'm just giving you, it's not my personal opinion, it's not Henry George's opinion, it's the consensus of the classical economists, 150 years of the great economists' works. Okay, so that's the definition of wealth. If you have a sandcastle You guys, we go to the beach with the kids. We spend 5 hours. I love this stuff. We spend 5 hours creating the most beautiful sandcastle. The other day I was on, what beach was it? Long Island.
Jones?
I think it was Jones. It was like, I swear to God, it was as large as this apartment. Sandcastles, and there was nobody there that left. Of a beauty, of a refinement, of an artistry. It was just, I didn't have a camera. I spent half an hour to just watch this stuff. It was unbelievable. Now, why is this beautiful sandcastle not wealth? Why is this sandcastle in the definition of the classical economist? Why is it not economic wealth? Why doesn't it have economic value?
Because the labor never allowed you to access material wealth through your labor.
Well, it's
labor, and it's a labor for art and for viewing, but
okay,
the person who put the labor in got nothing, no benefit.
You're going in the right direction. It's done for personal pleasure. You're doing it. Does it satisfy human desire? Yes. Is it material? Yes. Does it have exchange value? No, because the next wave, the next high tide comes and it's gone. Yeah.
Yes.
So they had a very clear structure and a very clear way in deciding what was what and what was out of this realm of economics. Now, wealth is defined, the wealth pie is defined by 3 factors of production. The factors of production are land or natural resources, labor or human exertion, could be mental or physical, and capital. But capital wasn't regarded, it was not defined as financial capital. For 120 years we have been brainwashed, capital is financial capital, capital is money. No, for the classical economists, they all agree, Karl Marx, Adam Smith agree, everybody agrees, capital is only something tangible. It's tools, machinery, factories, and such things. It's productive, what we call today productive capital. With this definition, money is not wealth. Money in itself does not have economic value. With this definition, had we continued this school of thought, classical economics, we would not have had the Wall Street boys pick all our pockets in the last couple of years. Last couple of decades, I shall say. Not the Wall Street boys. Everybody, all the people who were in this kind of job description. Money is not wealth because, like, we're going on a bus tour in the Nevada desert, and some yokel puts up a sign, New York City 3,000 miles, let's say. Now, the guys in the Nevada desert who've never seen New York, who don't have iPods, don't have any communication, they might think the sign is the thing, right? Some natives think that when their picture is taken, then their soul. So we, as savvy New Yorkers, know the sign in the Nevada desert is not New York. My passport picture, my ID card, my driver's license picture is not myself. Same thing with money. Money is a medium of exchange and a measure of value. It's indicative of economic value. It is not economic value in itself. Now, the Wall Street boys have tried to convince us that money is value in itself. Tom Hanks, in that film 10, 15 years ago, Castaway, he's in the Federal Express plane, crashes, he's on the island, he has to redo the Robinson Crusoe thing, there's nothing. He starts with, he has Wilson, the rugby ball, and if he's hungry, he has to climb up on the coconut tree and get the coconuts. If he wants to fish, he has to fish it with his hands, so that's labor applied to land, labor applied to natural resources. Now, if Tom Hanks, he saved the Federal Express package, which he delivers at the end of the movie, that's the commercial, that's the product placement. But let's say he didn't have the Federal Express, we can be sure gave a lot of money for that movie. Now, if it hadn't been the Federal Express package, if it had been a suitcase full of $100 bills, would that in any way materially have changed his condition on this solitary island in the Pacific? No. No. So we are being hoodwinked. Enron did that, Bernie Madoff did that on a larger scale. The larger hedge funds and so on went into the same business. They're fooling us into believing that pushing paper creates economic value. It doesn't. Yeah, please.
For this theory, though, you must have...
Try and speak up for the mic, please.
For this theory, you need a large amount of gullible people. If these gullible people don't exist, they cannot have this scheme going.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, Ponzi scheme, if somebody promises you, what is it, 10, 15, 20% return over an extended period of time steady, anybody who studied the basics of economics will say there's something wrong there. You have an exponential growth. You know that exponential growth at a certain time crashes because there's no material correspondence to warrant this growth.
May I lend an observation here?
Please.
I believe that education is an amount of wealth, because with the education, with the concept of intelligence, you can differentiate between these schemes and these hoodwink operations.
Okay.
And therefore, intelligence education is a means of production and wealth.
Okay.
Because it enables the individual to problem solve and advance themselves.
Okay. I wouldn't disagree, except I'm still trying to recapping the understanding of wealth or economic value of the classical economists, and in their definition system, this was excluded. But we can get back into that later. I'm not against intelligence. I'm not against education. I'd be an idiot. I'd be shooting myself in the head. Right? I'm an educator.
My concept is the more you put off something and put off immediate gain, the richer the individual becomes.
That's a good principle. I'd be willing to go along with it. I would like to go. Just finish this, give an overview of this classical economic system, and then we can go into what happened in the 20th century and what's happening now. So we had land, labor, and capital as the three factors of production, and then you get as return for land is rent, return for labor is wages, return for capital is interest. Again, not monetary interest, but economic interest. You think of capital and interest as something tangible that's corresponding to. There's a distinction in the classical among the classical writers between natural interest and speculative interest. Natural interest is, for instance, capital. You're probably aware of, comes from the Latin capita, heads. Riches were measured in the ancient societies by cattle. The more cattle you had, the more heads of bulls and cows you had, the richer you were. That's where you get the bull market and the bear market from. Bull market means you're strong, you have a lot of cows and bulls, and bear market is the bear comes in and eats your herd. That's the old, in almost all societies, in all known societies, cattle is a sign of wealth, bulls and so on. Now, you go.
I wish to ask a question.
Yes, ma'am. Maggie, please.
Speak up, please, everybody.
There is, in the old world system, something that are called traders.
Yeah.
And traders didn't operate on paper money.
Yeah.
They operated on promises.
Thanks. That's a good comment.
And a trader could go from England to Jerusalem and then to Tashkent and such, and all the lenders and such would trade in such, and they could depend upon their moments of when they could call upon them to remunerate. And so the trading institution was something so different than bills of no good. And their trading capacity was basically on hard currency, i.e. gems and golds and silvers and such. And
So it was harder to hoodwink people. That's a very important point.
And so they could go from one point to the other and say, this trader owes me this trader owes me that. And in a certain city, they could say, I could have my traders send me what has been traded in hard currency. Hard currency meaning not paper. And if you would look at the great story of Ivanhoe, you would hear what that was about.
What was that about?
Yeah, help us. I love Ivanhoe, but I haven't really read the Ivanhoe comics in about 30 years.
It's not a comic.
It's a great story. It's Walter Scott, of course. It's Walter Scott. It's a great, great story.
No.
But
it
the
was Ivanhoe, an old elder Jewish fellow was
Isaac. Was his name Isaac by any chance?
Isaac of York.
And he had a beautiful daughter named Rebecca, if I'm not mistaken.
This was in
Yeah? I think so. Anyway, you're raising a good point, Maggie, that trade and the economic activity was more solid. And before there was money, there was trust. And trust, of course, you're all aware, is credit. And so when banks deal with each other, you write each other an IOU, and if the creditability is the integrity of the persons involved is assured, the parties know each other, they've been trading with each other, then you don't need money. Because it's a letter of credit, and you know that this letter of credit is going to be honored because there's the honor in good faith. It's all going to be achieved, so you didn't need all these. Now we're coming in a sense back with the credit cards, because the credit card is run through the system, and you can be on the other side of the Atlantic, and your credit history comes up directly. So I mean, they can credit card identity theft and so on. That's a downside of it. Now, just to round up the classical economists' view and come back to then get into what the neoclassics did with it. If you had everything intangible, so to speak, and you had capital was yielding interest, natural interest, not speculative interest, labor was giving good rents, good wages, and land was yielding rents. Now, how could you play the system? The system could be played in cornering the market on land. I'm talking about 19th century, 18th century. The market could be cornered, or the system could be played with in monopolizing land and resources. Now, in the 1850s, Benjamin Franklin wrote a letter warning of the abuse of land speculation. Now, I'm sorry, what did I say?
1850.
No, I'm sorry, absolutely. 1750s, before the Declaration of Independence. Benjamin Franklin, great, read his economic writings, read the poor...
When you say land speculation, what do you mean by that?
I'm going to elaborate on this a little bit. Poor Richard's Almanac and some of he wrote on paper currency and such things. The founding fathers were great economists. They have great essays on economics, which go back to the Physiocrats, which were about the best thing that ever happened to Western economics since then. Now, the idea was, let's say there were 10 million Native Americans, 10 million of First Nations on a continent that today covers 300 million. So the population, partly nomadic, partly not Hopis and so on, was stationary. The population was much sparser. Now there are a couple of absolute laws in economics, classical, neoclassical, whatever. Population density increases economic value. That's an absolute law. What I said at the beginning, 500 million people on the planet, 1798 when Malthus wrote. Today we have 7 billion people, nearly everything is 14 times more expensive. All natural resources must be 14 times more expensive on the average. That's an absolute law. So you come onto the island of Manhattan, we're taking a time machine. We're going back onto the island of Manhattan. Today is what? May 24th, 2010. Let's say we're going back to May 24th, 1410, 600 years back. Okay? We're all in the, let's say this is not a space capsule, a time capsule. We're stepping out, and what do we see? I mean, we're not on the 13th floor. We have to come down to the ground. What's on the ground? What do we see outside?
Trees, grass.
trees, grass, maybe chipmunks, maybe deer, maybe some Indians. And what is our chance of survival? No, I guess we're a little understaffed with females. What is our chance of survival? Let's say, God forbid, the time capsule gets stuck. We're stuck. We have to survive. What are our chances to survive the next winter?
Depends on the individual.
No, we here in this room.
I wouldn't survive very well.
Now, what are our chances?
Well, it's based on our ability to find food and create shelter.
Thank you. And 24th of May, we're actually doing pretty good because we have half a year before the cold season comes back. Up in the where the cloisters are, there are the rocks and the caves, northern part of Manhattan. We can find wild berries. Maybe we can even like till some ground and plant something. So I think our chances are fairly high. If we were in January 1st or something, we get the first snowstorm, we're done for. But now, what is the land value on the Manatus was the original name of the island. What was the land value? Say there are what are there? The Mohawks. Yeah. Say there are 100 Mohawks on this island, and say 20 people in this room.
Don't go there, because the Indians had no concept of real estate. They were nomads, and they went where the food source was.
That's what I'm driving at. That's what I'm driving at. That's what I'm driving at. So let's say it doesn't matter if the Indians were there or if they were going somewhere else.
The land itself had no value.
Now, exactly, land itself. That's what I'm driving at. Land itself. No. I'm glad you're reinforcing this point.
You want to prove the contrary.
No. Land had no value.
Yeah.
But now, today, we have 7 billion or 8 billion in the city, and we have like another 7 or 8 coming every day to do trade or whatever. So if 16, 17 billion people coming into the island of Manatus, is the land still valueless? In the sense not of the Native Americans, but in the sense of the classic economists. No, it's not. It is very valuable because population density increased. So long as there is enough land, so long as there are enough resources, it's like we are here in this beautiful apartment of Harold Chenner and Maggie, and we have plenty of chairs, so we are comfortable. Where we 50 people, or sometimes you have your New Year's parties, then it's like crowded, right? People maybe fighting over chairs. So that's the same principle with land value. Now, land value, yes, sir.
It's part of that is perception, because if you perceive, if you think, it's your mindset too. If you think you need to be in New York, like everybody needs to be right here, and they really don't.
That's supply and demand.
But they think they need to be here.
There is a psychological component, that's right.
Psychological component, because you can go 100 miles up from here and get 40 acres for maybe $25,000.
Thank you. That's exactly the point I'm trying to make.
You get incredible land 100 miles away from here.
Thank you.
And buildings.
Aristide, was it?
Aristides. Factory buildings for chump change.
That's I'm told in Detroit you can get a house for $500.
Isn't it also true that the Indians really had a different concept of ownership of the land?
Yes.
In other words,
You said that.
there was no such concept as ownership of land.
Of course.
The concept was that as long as you were here, you used the land. You enjoyed the land, but the land didn't belong to
It was
you.
transitory wealth.
It belonged to the universe.
You did not use the land. The land was a gift for you.
Thank you. Now,
This was what land was about.
my friend Bruce Oatman used to say the Indians got royally screwed. He was the man. He was the head of the education committee at the school. He was one of the men who hired me. He's no longer with us, fortunately.
I mean, wasn't the land like the sun or the moon?
Yes.
No, we're coming exactly to the point. We're coming exactly to the crucial point. We're coming to the crucial point. We're just having a course at the school, James Fenimore Cooper, The Last of the Mohicans, and the concept of the First Nations of nature. Now, let me just finish this for a moment. And if the First Nations view of nature had prevailed, namely, you cannot own land. That's precisely the Georgist view. You cannot own land and resources like you can't own the air. If I own the air in this room, I make you pay for it. When you run out of quarters, we had that. The monopolist of resources becomes master over life and death. That's fascism. That's something no human being should be put into a position over somebody else. Now, the Native Americans knew that. They knew that every time a baby is born, the baby enters into a relationship with nature, and the baby has to have access to nature. Now, I come to something that I've discussed with Harold Chenner in one of his shows. Henry George in 3 sentences, in a nutshell, in 3 minutes. All human beings have a right to live. All human beings have a right to live? Yes? No one can live without natural resources. We just went through that. Air, you're out of air, you're done in 10 minutes. Out of water, you're done in 5 days. You're out of food, and so on. Yeah, down the line. So that it's called a Georgist syllogism. 2 premises: major premise, minor premise, and conclusion. Major premise: all human beings have a right to live. Minor premise is no one can live without resources. And what's the conclusion?
We all have a right to resources.
Bingo! You have taken the course before, right? Or you've seen one of the tapes.
How does that differ from Marx?
Okay, that's a good question. How does it differ from Marx? Marx did not have a clue about resources. Marx was transfixed. He got himself mesmerized by capital.
By what?
But Marx got himself mesmerized by capital.
By capital and labor.
And he took, capital and labor. Marx is very, very Manichaean. It's very black and white. It's only capital and labor, but you need the resources. Resources is the first material from which now we have this oil disaster in the Gulf. We would not have had this if the Native American view had prevailed. And it's almost like Henry George's theory. If you want to understand Henry George's theory, it's almost as if he had channeled somebody like Chief Seattle, as if he had channeled the original view on nature of the Native Americans here. So he says, the first thing, if you want to understand Henry George, is honor nature, honor natural resources. Don't take out more than you need. Leave the rest for the succeeding generations. Now, what are we doing? We're doing the opposite. We've had, I think in 2007, we had the average American had 130% of his national income in debts. In other words, we're borrowing from the generations that haven't even reached maturity to work yet. So we're picking the pockets of our own children and grandchildren. That is absurd. No culture that is in synchronicity with nature would ever do such a thing. So now we are upset. We're saying, what's the problem? Why is the economy coming down? If we have 300 million Americans and every single American on the average is 130% in debt, then why should the general economy, the sum is no larger than its parts, or the sum is larger than its parts, why should the general economy be any better off than any individual? And what are they doing? Thank you, Hal. What are they doing? They are printing money. And they're saying, we're printing ourselves out of this crisis. That's absurd, Harold.
If the natural, what was his take on private property, the private ownership of real estate or other property or capital assets? And what was it, that everyone should own everything? Or how is that? I don't understand the differentiation with Marx.
We're teaching, we're having a course of Henry George at the High School of Finance at Trinity Square. That's just it's just the next block from the World Trade Center site.
Yeah, right.
Now, what is the chance? These are all little Wall Street bankers that are being put into the school. What are the chance that the High School of Finance would let us teach Henry George if we were Marxists?
No,
Right next to Wall Street. The chances are zilch. They would have a couple of people, they would have sharpshooters on the roof, and they would take us out before we could open our mouths. Now, what's the difference?
How is the ownership of the what's
Henry George is extremely strong on private property, he says. Stronger than Milton Friedman, if you want.
okay.
He says, everything that you work for is yours. Entirely 100% yours. 1 nickel in taxes taken out is highway robbery. Everything that you have saved in stock, your capital, something you put away for a rainy day and that you reinvest as capital, is also yours. Any nickel on this is highway robbery. So in other words, in a Georgia system, you have no income tax, you have no capital gains tax. I'm talking about capital as tangible goods. I'm talking about capital as productive capital, not as pushing paper, not as financial capital.
You don't have any money to run the state. You have no social system then. You have a total anarchy.
Aristide, I haven't finished. That's 2 of the 3 factors. That's 2 of the 3 factors. And the third factor is nature or land or natural resources. Now, natural resources, you don't pay taxes on, but you pay a user's fee. Air, as long as it's proper, as long as it's freely available, as long as you can breathe it, is free. Water is free as long. You had this situation, Bechtel was doing that in Bolivia. They were privatizing water. They made it a law that you couldn't collect rainwater, which was a complete obscenity, and then they made it so expensive that the native population couldn't pay for their own water. That's a death sentence. That's a death sentence of a whole country. So they went to the streets not because they're revolutionary, but because they couldn't help themselves, because their life instincts was telling them that. And that was in Bolivia. So they had riots. The government, of course, was with the multinational corporations. The laws were such, Long story short, people died. The revolution happened. Bechtel got kicked out of the country. They had a new government voted in which said you cannot privatize resources that are life essential for the population of the country. So for these things, now these things that become scarce, like oil, like any kind of natural resources or raw materials that become scarce, you pay a user's fee for. There are 2 states. I give you 2 examples. We have that right in this country. You don't have to go far. In Alaska, if we all were citizens of Alaska, in January you don't get a Christmas card, or you don't get Father Christmas, or you don't get something for the 3 Kings or something. You get a check in the mail, several $1,000s, return for oil proceeds, because they are making such fortunes. They're sitting on such fortunes that they're saying, okay, they're not Georges, but they're saying, hey, this is really not fair. They're have such an incredible windfall, the oil companies. We are paying back some of that to the Alaska citizens as a citizen's dividend.
How is the calculus of that worked out?
That's I'll put you in contact with my mathematicians, and they'll do that for you. I'm not a mathematician. I'm an ideaman, but it's done, and they're happy with that. Wyoming has be with you in a second, Maggie. Let me just wrap up this Wyoming example. Wyoming has natural gas deposits. When oil went through the roof in 2008, they had the speculators. 145.29 was the cost for the barrel of oil on the world market. This was unsustainable in any system. No rich man, no poor man, no tourist, no trader. Nobody could afford this. World trade crashed. The barrel of oil came down to $30. Now it's $70, $70-some, $80. So again, the legislator of Wyoming, they're not Georges, but they're not stupid. They realize if multinational corporations or corporations come from out of state, out of the country, to exploit natural treasures out of the ground, they have to pay a hefty user's fee. They're paying so much, they make these natural gas companies pay so much user's fee that they have free universities, free education, no tuition. All the people who want to get a free education go to Wyoming. So these are 2 Georges measures. You tax resources, or you ask a user's fee for scarce resources, and everything else is free. And on that, you pay education, you pay health care, you pay everything you need to pay. Maggie.
All right. We've talked about nations with their own territories, their own lands.
Yes.
Now, there is something that's more crucial to the substantiation of economic guidance, etc., and sharing.
Yeah,
And that's called being able to garden the oceans.
that's good. That's good.
And
Cultivate the oceans. Yes, absolutely. That's good.
in 1980, I worked with the United Nations on the law of the sea.
Very important.
And there was something absolutely incredible that they were fighting for, because who owns the oceans?
That's the last comments. That originally was, that should be like air, should be owned by all of us. We should pay a user's fee and we should leave it alone and cultivate it and not befoul it. I talked to wildlife experts. Leonard Leroux was his name. He said he knew all about wildlife in the entire world. He was one of the leading wildlife photographers. He said the human species is the only species that befouls its own nest. No other befouls its own nest, meaning the nest is at this point the planet, and we have the example in the Gulf. No other species does that. So in a sense, we are more stupid than any other species on the planet. We think we are the hot stuff. We are the intelligent ones. We're the stupid ones. Sorry.
I didn't want to derail your. I didn't want to derail your objective in the road that we're going to. But I'd like to hear your concept of our technology. We have now developed to the plateau where we can build domiciles, not only homes, but extra land by building plateaus, tall buildings.
Mm-hmm.
This is increasing land.
Yes.
Because not only do you have a first story, second story, third story, but many higher buildings on which not only can you live, but you can plant and industrialize and nurture this portion. You've actually tripled, quadrupled the land that's available.
Yes.
At the same time, the Department of Agriculture has performed experimental farming in the Midwest of localizing in the middle of the country seafood,
Yes.
shrimp, crabs, lobsters,
Yes,
etc.
yes, yes, yes. That's what Maggie's saying. Cultivate the sea levels.
Farm
Yeah,
land
yeah.
where the farmers were actually paid for this experiment. So
Yes.
they didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
All the riches they had it, and they dissipated as well.
Yeah.
Well, but that's beside the point. The thing is that technology has now enabled, if we knew how to use it, extra real estate,
Mm-hmm.
which may be utilized for game.
Now, technically speaking,
Could I interrupt and tell you a small little story that I learned when I
I
was living?
hope it's funny.
It's the funniest thing I've ever heard. You talk about lobsters, etc.
Yeah.
How much did you pay for the last lobster you paid for?
I think
$30.
Huh?
$30.
No, I saw one in Chinatown for $10.
Wow, that's good.
$10, $30 on your restaurant, $10 on your restaurant?
Yeah.
Or in my little home in a place called East Hampton, in the end of Long Island, they had a British colony. And they had what you would call indentured servants.
Okay. I hope you're not speaking for the British here, are you? Just kidding.
But they put into their city code that indentured servants were not to be fed lobsters except for 6 days out of the week.
Except for 6 days out of the week.
Yeah, there were so many lobsters that they were just feeding them. They were just stuffing them with lobsters because there were so many relative to the population. But
And they put that in the law.
how does George apply to the current situation? Are there any political leaders that, in any sense, what would be his prescription now?
These may be people from the school.
Any political leaders on the horizon that understand Ron Paul or what? Who might understand it and might have practical application?
I think you're making a joke there, Harold.
No, we have, for instance, Dennis Kucinich is a guy who is working with us.
Yes.
Dennis Kucinich is a guy who is trying to apply the Georgia system.
Yes, okay.
Now,
We'll come down for you.
to well,
Unfortunately,
I understand.
people don't give him much credibility because they think he's so far left. They just don't pay attention to him. He doesn't have the backing of the rest of Congress.
No, Bertolt Brecht had a friend who was so far left. He said he was so far left he came out on the right, and that's what you're seeing. On the very left, we have Kucinich working with us. On the right, I didn't work with him, but I was told that not Rand Paul, but Ron Paul was working with us. But now this kid is coming up with this idea. They want to repeal the civil liberties. I mean, that's not something that's on the table in discussion.
I don't think it's useful to discuss these absurdities.
But just to go to Harold Chenner's question, we have the largest example, world historically speaking, the largest example of application of George's principles to the largest landmass was China. After Mandarin China in 1912, January 1st, Dr. Sun Yat-sen became the first Republican president of China, and he, with his successor Chiang Kai-shek, they married into the same family. There was a political marriage, married two sisters. Sun Yat-sen passed 1925. Chiang Kai-shek prolonged this till 1949. Unfortunately, Mao came in, the Stalinists came in, destroyed everything. Taiwan Formosa to this day has one of the most Georgiest, one of the most ecological, one of these most resources-friendly constitutions and democratic constitutions in the world. Ecuador, Correas of Ecuador has cemented in the Constitution of Ecuador a couple of years ago the right to access to land. We're coming back to the Georgia system, Georgia syllogism. If all human beings have a right to live, no one can live without resources, then all human beings have to have a right to resources, or access to resources. And that's being taken seriously. Just to finish that, the American Constitution is one of the great political documents, world historic documents ever. The French Declaration of Human Rights, the same. Henry George would amend the U.S. Constitution and the Declaration of Independence with an amendment to have access to land and resources.
But this also begs the question, as we increase our population, we increase more individuals who have rights, while in China, where they're trying to, in India, where they're trying to decrease their population or inhibit growth,
Okay.
each individual would then gain more rights.
Yeah.
So you can't say that an individual has so many rights if there is a boundary of those rights.
Mhm.
If there isn't enough rights to go around, then you have to curb or shrink or ration those rights.
Now, that's a good question. Henry George in some ways strikes me, I don't want to make undue comparisons, but in some way he strikes me as a modern day Moses who leads not just the children of Israel back into the promised land, but all of us. Because what we lost the margin of production, we lost the free land, we lost access to nature. Hi Kisya, hi Safi. These are teachers from our, Deborah, these are teachers from the Henry George School. They just closed the school. We're talking about resources, Kisya. So, historically speaking, in the 1890s, the last plot of land was sold in the United States. Originally, this is the land of the free, home of the brave, land of unlimited opportunities. That was the slogan that brought people from oppressed parts of the world, feudalistic slaves and so on, brought them into this country. And these slogans were literally right. They were literally correct for 100, 150 years, as long as free land was to be had. Because if somebody was oppressing you, if you had the choice between working for somebody else or making the same money for yourself or the same productivity, you would just go further west, young man, and have that freedom to work the land and the resources yourself. Now, the moment the last land was sold, we all, so to speak, become economic slaves to the preceding generations. We have to go pay rent to them. Now, what George says, George's solution is what happens is the system gets scored, and the neoclassical school of economics underwrites the scoring. They underwrite this gigantic theft. George says what you have to do is you tax resources and land 90%, and you untax everything else. And in doing this, people hold land out of use because for speculation, they know speculation increases the price, they make a windfall. Example we have right now, 48% of commercial real estate in Lower Manhattan is vacated.
Yeah. How much?
48. New York Times, source New York Times. 2011, 61% of commercial real estate in Lower Manhattan will be vacated. That means we all become victims through these speculators. Our prices increase. If you have these people pay 90% of the value every year, they cannot speculate. In other words, you take the mickey out of the economy, you take the mickey out of the speculation, and you leave natural interests, but you clear out the difference between natural and speculative interests. And in doing so, you bring back the promised land and giving all of us back the resources, accessibility that we need. You have kids from high school and college who could open on Fifth Avenue a computer shop or a BlackBerry shop or whatnot because the rents are affordable.
Okay,
You have
yes. We have to change tape. Don't say anything.